Retailers, as they look to the future, really need to consider how to bring it all together and be able to offer the items that their consumers want through the channels that they want. Symphony is in a great place from providing technology to retailers that really focus in the areas of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Being able to take advantage of those capabilities, as well as an end-to-end supply chain, is something that supply chain managers really need to consider as they look at how to do business in this environment.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Trade Squad. It is episode 3, and I'm super excited because we're going global today. We've got Jess Vania all the way from Singapore. Jess, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Jess Vania. I am an Indonesian, but I'm currently based here in Singapore. I'm working as a business operations analyst at HP's regional headquarters.
Awesome. And you're the Woman in Supply Chain series for our blog in July. So if you haven't gone to check that out, go and check that out over at letstalksupplychain.com. And of course, we have my beautiful co-hosts. We've got Leah and Audrey back for episode 3. And we've got so many hot topics that we should just dive in. So first topic of the show is going to be circular economy. And so the definition, if not everybody knows what circular economy is. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been hearing about circular economy kind of over and over and over again. So I just thought a definition might help. So a circular economy, often referred to simply as circularity, is an economic system aimed at minimizing waste and making the most of resources. This regenerative approach is in contrast to the traditional linear economy, which has a take, make, dispose model of production. And so that leads us into the circular supply chain. And I know that Jess has a lot of thoughts on this. So why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us what you think about the circular economy, circular supply chain, and what we're doing these days?
I guess I'll start with, to me, what differentiates the circular economy and the linear economy is basically going back to using whatever the materials you used previously and making it either compostable or recyclable to be used again. But the key would be, for me, would be making it compostable, because when you see an apple, it falls from the tree and then it biodegrades, and then whatever nutrition that was in the apple previously goes back to the earth, and then it goes back to whether it's like a tree or other plants. So that's where we are missing when it comes to production, and also the materials and products that we use on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Leah, Audrey, do you have anything else sort of to add to that? I'm going to get into a couple of examples as we move forward, but I think that, you know, it's super important for us to really start thinking about how do we turn our supply chains into sort of this idea of circular. And I know that there's a lot of issues, especially around textiles, right? I don't know about Audrey and your business, if you're running into this a lot, and you know, how you're sort of figuring that out?
Absolutely. I mean, in cosmetics and beauty, there's absolutely a lot of plastic packaging, a lot of paperboard packaging, and you run into things where the original intention was to protect the consumer, right? Because if people are getting their fingers and bacteria and they're trying things, then that kind of is just spreading germs. And so there's this whole idea of, a single use or protecting it so much with packaging and stickers that people can't get into it. And so it's trying to find better ways for, people to have access to containers that they can take back to a store and fill them with bulk product, and moving forward, or just using more biodegradable packaging. But it really is, especially in cosmetics and beauty, we've really taken it to the end of the line when it comes to like single use and just completely disposable stuff. So to walk it back to kind of, having that bulk packaging, or even to find innovative new ideas, is there's definitely an open market for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I recently posted an article about using banana leaves as packaging. Do you think we could use banana leaves in beauty products?
But then it runs into,
Why not?
I mean, yeah, you could use, yeah, you could. But it's always the thinking, right? So then if everyone starts using banana leaves, then we're overproducing bananas, right? So it's this weird kind of, everybody leaps on an idea, and then we kind of just exploit that, and then that comes up with a whole new host of problems.
That is so true. That is so true. So out here, I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but you know, like the straws, you can't get straws now. You can't get straws at Starbucks. You can't get straws at the restaurant. And it's a well-intentioned, great idea that I think is largely based on those tragic YouTube videos of sea turtles having straws pulled out of their nose. So to your point, Audrey, it'll be interesting to see, can we grab onto an idea that makes sense across, you know, multiple products, or is this really about a mindset shift? And if so, that's a lot more meaningful. And I think it's also good timing because, you know, with trade wars and some other things that are going on, people are going to have to be more cognizant of how you take advantage of domestic supply and how you know, reuse that and what that means. So it's an interesting idea.
What about contamination? Like if we use banana leaves in the beauty industry, would there be contamination? Like, is that something that we got to be worried about, I guess, when we're looking at alternatives for packaging?
For sure. Yeah, when you're looking at the compatibility of the packaging, will it hold the product? You know, certain products like a mascara, they can eat through certain plastics, right? So they can actually leak through. So, yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, there's a lot. People kind of take it for granted. They just kind of pick this stuff up. They assume it's like perfectly great for them, and they start using things. And, you know, I think we all assume that there's a lot of regulations that are enforced that maybe aren't exactly enforced or aren't followed.
Yeah.
You know, not to say that all of the products are unsafe, they are, but, you know, I think there's a very high expectation from the consumer, and the actual company may only be, you know, most companies are only about here. But yeah, there's a lot of different options. I mean, you look at some of the kind of what we would call like indie or boutique brands, like a Lush, or there's a couple of them who do bulk products, or they do the reusable containers. So Lush gives you a shampoo bar or a soap bar in a reusable tin, you know, so then you use through your bar, and then you take your tin back and get a new product, right? And it's the concept of the bulk food store too, where it's like there's scoops and there's you know, kind of protection for preventing contamination through the bulk product by using different containers, or, you know, that sort of thing. So there's lots of innovation out there, but like what, you know, speaking to what Leah was saying, is it, you know, are we all going to start becoming more minimalist? Is it kind of the end of the just grab and go, you know, or are we going to start carrying our straw, carrying our knife and fork with us, right?
Yeah, and I think it sets a high expectation on the companies to meet those demands, which are not easily done. And Audrey and I were actually kicking this conversation back and forth on Twitter a little bit, like my fur pillows. Like, is it, you know, more environmentally conscious to use fake fur? And if so, what does it take to produce that? Right. It's the plastic bag conversation right now. Do we go back to paper bags? Does one use more water versus, you know, chemical? So it's an interesting challenge. And I don't know if you guys saw the article. There was a grocery store chain that wanted to sort of shame customers into using their own bags. Did you see that? And so they put those, you know, it said something like, I frequent a certain adult toy store or something on the bag, the plastic bag, thinking it would embarrass the client, you know, the customer, to bring in their own bag. And instead it became like a cult hit. And so people purposely wanted to go in and collect these bags with these, you know, funny phrases on there. So it could backfire as well. Yeah.
Totally backfired. But you brought up a really good point about water. And that goes back to my point about retail, is that there is a lot of, from what I understand, I don't know a lot about it, but there's a lot of water used to produce textiles and clothing. Yeah. And so, you know, it's not just packaging, I guess, in this circular supply chain that we're that we're thinking about, it's also the use of water and different things like that. Do you have anything else to add, Jess? I know this is, an important topic for you. You're really passionate about. I know you wanted to come on the show and talk about it. So did you want to jump in here?
I guess your point on water, it's true that when it comes to manufacturing, for example, from one company I know, Nike, they founded a way where they could dye their products, their clothing in a more sustainable way. But the thing is, the technology is already there, but because it costs a lot and you need engineers to create the machines and everything, it's not easy to apply all of the technologies we already have around the world and to other companies as well. So I guess it goes to the consumer side as well, where we think sustainability is expensive, it's troublesome, you need to bring your own spoons and forks everywhere, which I actually do.
Good for you.
But it also, interestingly, it also ties in with you're using more of, how do I put it? As in, you use less of something, but then you end up using more of the other thing. Less water, using more of this and that. So I guess we do still need to find a balance of which to focus on, instead of just focusing on one item and then put all your resources there and neglecting the other impacts.
Yeah, and we kind of almost need like a roadmap, right? Like, where do businesses start? And if we all sort of collaborate and maybe start in a certain area, it will be a lot easier to tackle because it might be bite-sized chunks where we could tackle together and then move on to the next one maybe. I don't know if that's the answer, but again, I always talk about collaboration. So, maybe that is. But so I recently just did a podcast episode with a company called Cocoa Palette. And I want to talk about it because they are the essence of circular supply chain. So they are using coconut husks to build pallets. And what's happening when you're done with the pallet, it's biodegradable and can go back into soil.
That's fantastic. I mean, like, here's the thing that I think is really important with this question, because for a lot of companies, they're either going to feel enough pressure from their consumer base that those customers want to see a more eco-conscious company. But I always think, as consumers, we're sort of held liable for things like, did you dispose of your lithium batteries appropriately, for example? And then we all end up with a drawer full of old batteries that you don't know what to do with, or whatever it is. And it seems to me that from a government standpoint, if we applied a degree of culpability, so in other words, if your product's disposal or use could lead to environmental damage or anything else, and I know at least here in the US, it's a long shot to think that companies might actually be held liable for this stuff, but I do think it's the type of sea change that we have to implement if we really want to see big moves in this type of conversation.
Absolutely.
I fully agree. Fully agree.
Well, I just
even
found
the cups.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, you go ahead, Sarah.
No,
like
no,
the
go
cups, ahead. Like it says, like all those, we have like Tim Hortons here, the like ubiquitous coffee cup. And it says like, please don't litter on the bottom of the cup. And like, that's the corporate responsibility.
Right.
Oh, well, we told our customers not to litter it. Okay. Did you provide garbage cans or recycling outside the store? Did you tell us that the cap can be recycled or the cup can be, but not, So yeah, it's pushing everything onto the consumer. And then not only does the consumer have to make the buying choices on who they're going to buy from, but then whatever they do purchase or use, then they have to figure out where it's going, how it's disposed of, or the municipality or like their local community has to figure, we have green recycling days here. So in the city of Toronto, you have like, a Saturday where you can bring all of your batteries, you can bring your old TV or your old, toaster or whatnot that's like just not in working repair. But yeah, that's all on the municipality, which means it's all on me as well because I'm the taxpayer paying for it. So.
Right. And then how many people actually follow through with that versus how many people throw their laptop into the trash can? I think I've never done that, but I'm just saying, I think that's a big question mark. Who's responsible? And, is there a degree of corporate responsibility that could drive the innovation necessary to make this a reality?
Yeah, I think it's, a bigger topic than just one company or two companies. And I think that the change really needs to be driven from a couple of the large companies to say, hey, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and this is why we did it, right? We reduced in this area, we didn't increase in this area, this is how we did it, and this is how you can too, right?
And you see that coming in from like a company like H&M, right? Which got a really quick kind of negative reputation for fast fashion and just being almost disposable in the clothing. And then from them turning it around to having conscious collections, and also being, you can bring your clothes, your textile waste to H&M locations. And there's a kind of bin right at the front of the door where then you can leave the textile waste with them. And I mean, I assume then they're following through with a proper recycling textile program.
But see, that's the thing, we don't know.
But they've got it all
right?
set up.
Yeah.
I don't 100% know, but they talk about it. So, you know, you hope that that's what they're doing. But yeah, it is, you know, we do put a lot of trust in companies behaving well. And sometimes it gets to be a real challenge trying to meet bottom line while behaving well. And it sometimes is hard as consumers to distinguish between who really is behaving well, and can I reward them with my business? But
yeah, and how do we
ultimately
drive that corporate change with it, right?
Yeah, and get everybody to just have that integrity, right? Like I do good business because it's a good thing to do, you know, and that's hard when, you know, a lot of our parameters are like, what's the bottom line? How much does this cost? You know, if we have to then fulfill the circular piece, we've got our supply chain that gets it out. How do we get our supply chain that gets it back in? You know, and that's a whole other investment of resources. I mean, it's a legitimate challenge. It's very challenging and overwhelming.
Yeah, well, in my research, I was looking at returns. One of the biggest issues that we have, especially with that fast fashion, is the returns, because they're saying that the return rates is as high as 70% in the returns. So what our company, maybe that's the first place to focus on corporate change, is really on that returns factor. What are we doing with our returns? Are we refurbishing them? Are we recycling them? Are we donating them? Right? Which, you know, donation really is a form of recycling as well, especially when you look at fashion. You know, there's a lot of people that can, you know, really benefit from that kind of return process, is that, you know, your stuff's returned, it's not usable, but it's still usable, can be donated, that kind of thing. But some of the research was saying that the circular supply chain also holds the key to potentially unlocking a $4.5 trillion economic opportunity. Like with a T, like that is huge. And you see these accelerator programs and stuff like that popping up all over the place. There's one called Circular Supply Chain Accelerator, and the aim is to stimulate a more large scale adoption of circular business models. So I think that there are, you know, a few things in place right now. People are certainly talking about it. It's just a matter of doing something about it. And hopefully through these programs, hopefully through talking about it enough or a lot, we're going to be able to change that momentum and change some of the thinking that's happening on the corporate side. But another couple of examples, just while I'm on that. So there's a company called TexLoop. They utilize fabric scraps to make new yarns and fabrics. There's also AgriLoop. Transforms food crop waste into natural fiber products. And I think they're also saying that items such as banana stalks, squeezed oranges, mushroom roots, spoiled milk, pineapple leaves, chicken feathers, wood pulp, and soybeans are also being used to make textile fibers. So I think there's a lot of movement on, you know, the retail textile side as well, which is great to see.
It's a lot to unpack there, because if we're thinking primarily about how to mitigate waste, I mean, that's just what we do in every aspect of our human existence, for better or for worse. So it's really interesting, because I think if the supply chain side of things starts to look at how to maybe amplify the opportunities with those waste materials, it could be a real driver. And it would certainly be interesting to think that innovation in that space could lead the way and really showcase how it's not all about bottom line. There are other benefits. I think about, the Port of Long Beach out here and their goal to be completely carbon free by 2030. And they've set these different benchmarks. And I know at first, as it is for most companies, a lot of expense in creating these plug-in docks. But what they've seen is that there's a real interest from, shippers who want to be able to come in and utilize that. And it's changed the dynamic in terms of how other ports maybe look at that. And I know that's happening in a lot of places, but it's one example of how different leaders in the space could maybe drive that change, because we're talking about waste ultimately.
Yeah, and not looking at it as a cost center necessarily. I mean, with this $4.5 trillion economic opportunity. I mean, yes, we're talking about it being a cost center at first, but at the end of the day, it's also an economic opportunity. So which way do you look at it? Glass half full, glass half empty, right?
I'm curious to, Jess, since you brought the subject up, do you ever see the role of influencers, having any impact on how the consumer perceives a company advancing these types of ideas?
Influencers influencing companies, I'm not quite sure, but I guess it's more on the consumer side, showing them awareness. For example, I guess there's one influencer here in Singapore. I believe her name is Brenda. She goes by Wordweed. The way she's been creating more videos about being sustainable and also supporting certain companies that recycle their items. For example, she recently just made a sponsorship about a laptop because the company actually recycles their items, I believe around 20%. But the thing is, when it comes to influencers, I guess they do promote certain companies, but again, sometimes the companies do so just for marketing reasons. So it goes back to whether are they a good company or whether they have other intentions to sell their products and get the consumers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What would you like to see from companies? Being new to supply chain, I think you just finished your supply chain management. Congratulations, by the way. And so I want to know, as a young professional in this industry, what would you like to see from more companies on the supply chain side?
I guess to touch on what you said previously, sustainability might be seen as a cost driver, but instead you're actually wasting more money on items that are just going to be thrown in the landfills. When you could have taken the materials, for example, when you have a phone, there's lithium, there's certain metals where if you actually combine all the phones that have been thrown in the trash, you're basically wasting all those resources that you spend so much money on mining them and then manufacturing, and spending also the money on the logistics to just send the items. So instead of creating a linear economy when you're just storing it, your materials actually still have value, but it's the issue of extracting it back and making it reusable. But besides that, also the items such as plastic, where maybe you can't reuse, we have to find a solution where you need to be able to compost them. For example, I guess there's one example of an Indonesian company that's trying to, instead of using plastic bags, they're trying to make plastic bags out of cassava. If you are familiar with that, it's a really vegetable. I actually have one around here, but I'm not quite sure where it is. But it's still an issue with that, where because it's compostable within, I believe, 2-3 months or 6 months, it's still too fragile. And the issue with previously you said banana leaves. I believe a few supermarkets in Bali are doing that as well. There's the issue of contamination as well. Yeah.
It's really just about trying to find the solutions. But you're right, taking the components of what you're selling and taking a look at ways that maybe they can be moved into a different product, or maybe sold on their own to other companies that see the value in some of those components. So I think we'll leave that conversation there, unless anybody else has anything else to add on circular supply chain. Nope. All right. So we're going in a completely different direction, and we're talking about money. Well, we're talking about currency, and a specific type of currency, because just recently, I think everybody saw this, but Facebook came out with their new cryptocurrency announcement. And so we wanted to talk about this. It's a subject that Leah, brought up and thought that it would be important to talk about, especially with how it's going to affect supply chain. So Leah, I'll turn it over to you.
So I'm just fascinated. I'm truly fascinated. I was at a presentation a few weeks ago, and the conversation was about Facebook's announcement. But what was interesting was the backstory is apparently that a lot of emerging markets have been driving this agenda. So as Facebook has broadened its resources for small business to use Facebook as a platform around the world for companies to engage with one another, those cryptocurrencies have become really an interesting dynamic. And here in the US, I know that I've heard from folks working in that space that a lot of the crypto companies are offshore rather, because there's concerns about how will the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, come out in terms of how they regulate the industry. And then there's always these conversations happening with like JP Morgan Chase and some of the big banking entities in that space, where they're publicly saying, oh, no, it's too dangerous, it's an unregulated currency. And then you find out that, of course, they're developing their own version of crypto. So I just think it's really exciting. And so to me, it will be interesting to discuss, is this yet another disruptive space that a small business, mid-sized company in particular, really has the opportunity to get in there, and it's the Wild West at the moment. It's unregulated, and there's a lot of opportunities. So I just find it really intriguing.
What, Jess, have you heard anything about sort of crypto in Singapore and this Facebook announcement? Have they been talking about it a lot? What is cryptocurrency like in Singapore?
To be very honest, I'm not quite sure about cryptocurrency when it comes to the wider market. I just know that people still do invest in it, but there's always the highs and the lows. When it's booming, then a lot of people just throw money at it, but they're not really in it for the long term, nor do they really believe that there's a long-term future for cryptocurrency yet. But I researched a little bit on the Facebook cryptocurrency Libra. It seems similar to a little bit more like Google Pay or Grab Pay, if you're similar with, or maybe like PayPal. So I'm thinking when it comes to the adoption of it to smaller companies, in Indonesia, it'll be like e-payments like GoPay. So it opens the market to smaller companies, SMEs, where say you have like one little stall where usually you only get 10 transactions a day, 20 transactions a day, but because of that, you get the exposure. And because it's also paired with like a ride hauling company, GoPay, they actually deliver the items within instead of using a courier within 1 day, it delivers your items within 15 minutes or 30 minutes.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm not quite sure whether it'll have the same impact because it doesn't have that aspect, but it seems something similar to, because of the fast transactions and also the very low transaction fees, it'll increase smaller businesses volumes for their sales.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, on the supply chain side, I know from building the Ships platform that we were looking at different ways for shippers to be able to pay on the platform. Mm-hmm. And I think traditionally, shippers have been in the mindset of credit, right? They use freight forwarders for credit. And so they really like the credit option. So when I was looking at it, I was looking at credit card. But not all shippers might want to pay by credit card because of the points, but they don't like the fact that they're paying immediately because they're so used to credit. And now you add this third layer of cryptocurrency. I'm just not sure. I think it might take a little while for us to be able to adopt that in supply chain. You know, when building this platform, it's definitely something in the background potentially to offer if it does, you know, sort of take off as a form of payment. But I just don't know if we can get past the traditional thinking and sort of that credit approach.
You know, it's interesting too, because with this Libra crypto in particular, it's backed by both US dollars and euros.
Yeah.
And so that's unusual. And I think this idea that, because you make a good point around credit and the need for credit, quite frankly, but, you know, with crypto, the question always is, well, where can I spend this? It's not like I can take cash somewhere. But when we talk about then the integration with blockchain, does that mean crypto becomes a point system in a way over time? So instead of a dollar value exchange, you're just accruing these crypto dollars or points, if you will. And would that carve out a new potential credit system within the space?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to influence blockchain. I don't quite know how. I mean, it really all depends, because I'm hearing all sorts of stuff. People don't trust Facebook, and so they're not trusting the crypto. But then, like you said, it's backed by all of these different companies. Like the list just goes on and on in the article that I was reading. And so, you know, it almost makes you think like there's got to be something there. You know, and is this something that we're going to be talking about in a few years to say, hey, I'm going to have to add that as a payment option because, you know, it's here to stay. I don't know. I you know, it's kind of early days, but at the same time, I think if we're going to have one champion to sort of bring it to fruition, try it out, maybe Facebook is that person.
It's interesting too, because you think about like with China's initiative around the Belt and Road, you know, and China's willingness just culturally to utilize virtual wallets and, you know, for better, for worse, personal credit and a lot of other, you know, digital transformative technologies. Would that possibly carve out an opportunity as well? It could be very interesting.
And is it a competitive advantage? Right? You start offering payment by crypto, or they start forcing people. If you want to buy this certain service, this is why I'm saying like they could be the champion of this. They have,
and that's already happening. I mean, that's actually a really good point. Like forcing behaviors, you know, in the US, and I don't remember how this is phrased, but legally, every business is supposed to be required to take US dollars. And yet we're seeing more and more frequently this trend towards credit card only, or, you know, virtual payment only. And the government hasn't come out and taken a direct stance on what that means in terms of, you know, it's stated on the currency itself. But I think to your point, Sarah, that's really interesting to think that these technologies could force behavior shifts, and that may be how it has to happen. I'm particularly intrigued by the idea that for institutions, very small ones obviously, and individuals certainly who don't have a traditional credit holding institution, so they don't have a financial you know, credit history. Yeah. Is this an opportunity, or is this perhaps, you know, a big mess looming up ahead?
And how long do we have?
That's where I'm...
Right? Go ahead.
Yeah. That's where I'm questioning, like, you know, for us, I mean, Sarah and I are in Canada, where there are about 10 recognized banks. And in Canada, banking is extremely regulated. There's loads of regulations around banking. We have 10 banks. That's it. You know, and then when Canadians look at going into the US, it's like, whoa, that's a whole different system of banking that they've got there. So then to take out, you know, to kind of shift from our North American, this is how credit operates, this is how banks operate, this is how currency operates, and shift it around the world, as now that, you know, we're in full globalization and kind of a mobile society. You know, picture yourself somewhere else where they don't have the kinds of banking regulations or currency opportunities that we have here. I mean, in Canada, you have access to every currency, you can convert everything. And then if you're somewhere else, you know, it's a more restrictive picture. And so then is this just a huge opportunity for you as a small business to really be like, I don't have to deal with going to the bank that's probably maybe 3 hours away from me. They're the only people that give me currency and only a certain amount. Like, I can just start having this huge opportunity in business. So, I mean, cross-culturally, it's just such an interesting getting out of my Canadian banking or credit mindset to just picture what is it like in other places. You know, I'm really curious to understand that piece, because it does seem like it's this big drive to crypto, and I'm like, oh, but why? You know, we have banks and it's so easy and you just go set up a bank account here, but it must not be like that everywhere else. It's fascinating.
Well, and I can tell you, as a small business, I employ a couple of freelancers in the US, and I'm finding a challenge paying them in US dollars, because so in the States, there's a lot of different avenues to be able to do that. But in Canada, there's not. And every single avenue costs the other person money. And so they're saying to me, well, you know, you can send me the money, but it's costing me this much, which means that they want me to pay for it, which is fine. And I get that. But, you know, is this where cryptocurrency is going to help me as a small business be able to pay my freelancers a lot easier, be a lot cheaper? And I just wonder about faster. That, because like I am having a super hard time trying to pay them and without incurring huge extra costs, because as a small business, everything adds up, right?
That's such a good point, because I've had the same challenges when I've tried to contract with folks in other countries, because, you know, then you got to have some sort of, you know, tax status here, and then it's very complicated. So I think that is one of the fascinating potential elements here. What will it mean to universally recognize certain types of cryptocurrencies? And then more importantly, you know, who's going to look at that when you need those for your fundamental everyday expenditures? You know, because today I wouldn't want to accept crypto and then hope to go to the grocery store or pay my rent with cryptocurrencies. So, you know, it may be that for, you know, its early phases, those crypto dollars are only applied towards certain types of transactions or building certain levels of credit until we see a more universal acceptance.
But wait for it, because I think it's coming.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I totally think so. 100%.
Yeah, it's coming. Is there the risk though, like when small businesses started e-commerce, and everybody really got into e-commerce, and you'd have these like these one-person businesses started doing e-commerce, and they'd start shipping globally, and they weren't keeping track, or they didn't have knowledge around the fact that when you're exporting and importing, there's taxes and fees that have to be paid. And, you know, certain countries then, I think Germany or in Europe might have been some of the first to be like, oh, you've got to pay sales tax on this, you know, and people hadn't, you know, these smaller businesses, it was kind of a, you know, what we call, you know, the colloquialism Wild West, right? Where there weren't any rules. No one was really monitoring it. And then all of a sudden they were. So I think there's a risk there for the smaller businesses who are like, oh, let's go. It's fine. It's like, it's lawless. Let's just go. And then, you know, give it, you know, 5 to 6 years when the government is like, oh, wait a second, people are doing this. How can we tax, you know, especially here in Canada, how can we tax that?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, that's going to happen. In fact, it's really, not to go off on a tangent, but I think it's really terrifying, quite frankly, for e-commerce business to learn that now state by state in the U.S., those states are getting wise to the fact that they're this is why Jeff Bezos is so wealthy, because he was in that time frame when there were no taxes on this stuff.
Yeah.
And now they're even looking at applying that retroactively. So potentially with crypto, we could see the same thing happen, where companies are accepting crypto payment as another avenue to bypass taxes or tariffs and things. And you may get away with that for a little while, but I think the tax man always comes. And now maybe he even wants stuff that you did a few years ago. So for sure it's coming, and yes, you got to be really careful.
So that is why when somebody just bought something from me on eBay, it added tax, because it never used to do that before.
Yes.
And she was all mad about it adding tax, and I was like, I can't do anything about this.
Yes.
I wanted to pay a certain amount, but it kept adding tax, and I was like, well, I've tried to eliminate it, but it won't go away, so you're going to have to pay tax. Sorry.
And
IRS
safer
is
for
on to
you.
you.
Crazy. Okay, that explains so much that's happened in the last week for me. Thank you, Leah. All right, and next subject, we are talking about IMO 2020. This is another big topic in shipping because it's you know, it's really going to turn things kind of on their head, and I don't know where these costs are coming from. I mean, you know, Audrey, I'm going to shoot it over to you because this one was an important one to you.
For sure. So just in case everyone isn't aware, IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, is going to enforce a 0.5% global sulfur cap on fuel content starting January 1st, 2020, so IMO 2020. So right now it is about a 3.5% limit, and it's part of the IMO's response to, you know, just heightening environmental concerns, and it's contributed by, there's a lot of harmful emissions from ships because they are still using fuel. What's exciting though, as Leah was mentioning, like in Long Beach, I know in Rotterdam as well, they're setting up a lot of electronic charging stations, and they're retrofitting ships to actually just add, instead of even going through and changing up the engine, they're just adding a piece kind of on top of the ship to be able, for it to be able to charge at these charging stations. So, you know, I guess it's kind of a hybrid kind of mechanism, but IMO is going to have a huge effect as well. We're anticipating that costs are going to go up and vessel availability is going to go down, because if vessels can't get what they're calling scrubbers, which will help clean the fuel or the sulfur, they won't be able to sail after kind of January 1st. So then what does that do for shippers to have availability? And also then when there's a scarcity, how much is that cost going to go up?
Yeah. So what are you doing? Like, do you have a supply chain strategy for this? I mean, as the only shipper on this panel, I kind of want to know from you, you know, what are you going to do? Because like the costs are going to go up. You know, I read that, you know, some of the smaller ports may not even have this type of fuel or even a charging station. So if they are nowhere near a port where they can reload or recharge or whatever, they're going to be stuck there until they can. And if that's got your container on it, I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky we're using kind of the major ports. Most of the, you know, everyday consumer goods come through major ports. They're not as specialized. So we will likely see price increases, you know, because I really can't predict anything. But the preparation for us.
How long did it take you to get that POD the other day? I'm just saying.
I know, right?
I mean, I'm just saying.
I got it today.
What?
I got it today. This delivered, so that's 1 month and a day. 1 month and a day.
Yeah. Oh, okay, people.
June 14th it delivered.
If you do not follow Audrey on Twitter, go and follow Audrey on Twitter and check out her tweets about this latest POD. And I know I'm totally off topic here, but it took a month and a day to get a POD. I mean, what year are we in? I think we're coming up to 2020. I don't know what's happening right now.
Yeah.
A month to get a POD.
A month.
Yeah.
He drove around to different spots. He doesn't have a phone. I don't know. They don't have phones.
Picture.
But we're going to put self-driving.
Picture.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know.
I really like the mention of adaptive technologies, because I think it's the only way that, you know, ports and shippers are going to be able to meet those requirements. So that's really interesting because, again, does it go back to government incentives? And then, without naming names, but certain leaders in our administration are not terribly inclined to follow, I don't know, things like climate change and the impact on, you know, all kinds of things. So in which case then, does that mean that some governments might openly ignore that, you know, new mandate? It's really interesting. But adaptive technologies, I think, will be critical for shippers to be able to try and catch up. And then for consumers, that's eventually going to hit the consumer in terms of prices. I mean, not only to Sarah's point that now you're starting to see tax automatically calculated, but I know for a consumer buying one-off goods out of China, for example, the wait time is much longer because now we're talking about trade wars impact on things. So this could be a really critical issue for a lot of, shippers and folks in that maritime sector.
And
I think people have really,
go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just think people, your average, it's like the trade wars until about this past year, most people, I don't think, understood where their goods came from. So then this has been a very industry specific issue. And because you never know what's going to happen. Is the price going to go up? Are we going to have a vessel shortage? There's a lack of predictability. And so even the industry is like, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Try your best to prepare for this. And then what's going to happen in, say, March and April when, we run through inventory and then it's like, oh, geez, prices have to go up. So the consumer is going to get kind of another, this has been building in the industry for, say, 4 to 6 years. And then the industry is going to get the sticker shock, like the consumer story is going to get the sticker shock in like June 2020.
Yeah. But are these like pie in the sky ideas that people are coming up with and then throwing at corporations without any sort of planning or strategy behind it, where it's, because I almost feel like it's just so wishy-washy and just sort of thrown out there and like, here's what we need, here's where you need to be, and we'll give you a year to do it, figure it out. How is that collaborative? How are we going to move everything forward? We're just going to piss each other off. Excuse my language.
Well, maybe that's actually what's needed back to Jess's early conversation, right? Because if there are these mandates with potentially fines or other restrictions that are going to force behaviors, do those behaviors in fact actually start to impact the way that corporations are looking at, granted from a bottom dollar point of view, how they can capitalize and squeeze as much profit as possible out of things? And so if there's an element of environmental responsibility in there, maybe that has to come with, fines and laws.
But to your point about like government and like people getting involved, I almost feel like we're still in that siloed approach where we need more collaboration, where sort of everybody's on their own to make this happen. And is that really the approach that we want to go with? I mean, there's so many people involved in these decisions. Why are we not planning them better? Why aren't we able to give the industry more predictability so that not everybody thinks that it's so unpredictable and they're afraid to make moves because they don't know where their bottom line's going to be?
But not to be facetious, but there's still a flat earth society. Right? So there are people
please explain this to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
But like people who don't believe in climate change. They don't believe it. So then if you're like, we're all going to change our fuel because it's environmentally better for us, there's nothing wrong with the environment. This is just weather. How can you compel, to Leah's point, how can you compel this behavior change when people will like just buckle down and just refuse to believe that, there's a reason for it. And also people aren't necessarily always on their best behavior. Like to my point earlier with circular economy, you're relying on companies and people to just be on their absolute best ideal behavior. And we've seen that that's not exactly reliable, but it would be nice if, you could get more people on board and just, get more of that feedback and a collaboration on maybe the timing, is 5 years realistic? If we got this piece of government investment, would it really support the industry to making these changes and then cost less ultimately on the consumer? Absolutely. There's always room for more collaboration.
Well, and having that collaborative approach, then you've got people working together and not feeling on their own. And then people won't just do the bare minimum that they have to do.
They'll really connect in with it.
They'll connect with it, and they might, go maybe that one step further, which will then encourage everybody else to go that one step further. So this is where I'm almost sort of like, the collaboration, I know I keep using this word, but I love this word. I love it.
Yes.
Where we can all sort of get together instead of making a decision and then throwing it out everybody and saying, well, we don't know where this is going to land, and I'm sorry it's going to cost you more, but let's see what happens. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good approach. Jess, we have not heard from you on this topic. Do you want to weigh in here on our discussion about this IMO 2020 and, you know, maybe how it's been implemented? Because we are talking about that. We're talking about the higher costs because of it, ports not being able to accommodate the vessels. What do you think?
I guess I'm interested in whether the higher cost the impact will be pushed 100% on the consumers, or will it be slowly implemented and the companies have to bear the cost now and then slowly push it to consumers later on, if Leah or Audrey knows.
I know
Say that
everything.
again?
Yeah, Audrey knows everything.
Audrey knows everything.
Although you're having trouble predicting this one, right? This is what you said before.
Yeah, that's the catch of it, right? Some businesses might start pushing the cost tomorrow, and some might think that it's not going to be that. And the other thing is, it's kind of rumor at this point. I mean, I guess the carriers know best what status they're at. Like, if they have a fleet of 200 vessels and 10 of them are good to go already, and there's still 190 that need to, you know, scrubbers or retrofits or, you know, these new adaptive technologies added, then, you know, that's going to be costs that, yes, they might not even know what those costs are quite yet.
Well, and think about it. And I think this is a good point for consumers or anybody that is listening that maybe isn't in supply chain, to really think about, you know, where your products come from and how different things affect the different costs. So if the carriers need to go and, you know, do a variety of things to implement the IMO 2020 so that they're not getting fined, they have the costs that they're going to want to recuperate. And in order to do that, the ocean freight costs are going to go up, which in turn is going to be landed on the shippers' shoulders. And the shippers, depending on, you know, where they want to land as far as their bottom line, and depending on their margins, right? Because some shippers have healthy margins, some shippers don't. They might take somewhat of that hit, but they might not take all, which means their products are going to go up, which means the final cost to the consumer is going to go up, because everybody else down the line needs to recuperate the costs associated with the IMO 2020.
So does that mean that maybe there's an opportunity for just a really broad reset? Because a lot of this is coming from the consumer driving the industry fastest and cheapest.
Yep.
Is what all these decisions have been based on, right? And is that realistic anymore? And the other question is the why. Does the consumer resonate with the why? I mean, back to the original comment about sea turtle videos with straws being pulled out of their nostrils, consumers are like, oh my God, no more straws. Even though there's tons of other issues being dumped into the ocean that I'm sure we're not even aware of. But how much of this is resetting expectations from the consumer standpoint? And certainly China's been a huge driver in that. And so will they play a role in this?
That is a really, really good point, because now we're almost looking at that closed loop, right? The consumer's going, we need to do something about plastic, but they want their shipment tomorrow, or they want their shipment within 2 hours. Well, what are the costs, monetary costs, you know, shipping costs, I guess, cost to business, that kind of thing, to be able to get your package to you within 2 hours with less packaging, with all of these associated things that consumers are looking for when they get delivery. But the issue is that we're not looking down the line on how it's being impacted. All these, the push for environmental, how is that impacting business? How is that impacting? That's going to impact your wallet. Oh, no. We don't want to pay more, but we want this, and this. And I'm a consumer. You're a consumer. I mean, we're all consumers. you know, when I order from Amazon, yeah, it says same day. Yeah, I'll take it same day for free. No problem.
Mhm.
But we're not really thinking about those impacts and the different regulations that are coming down the line because of that pressure.
And I don't think most consumers think about, especially with the ease of returns that we have right now, I don't think they think about the environmental impact just on sea life and the ocean, just from the shipping, you know, the cargo ships traveling across the ocean. We don't think about the cargo that goes via airplane, and all of that has a huge impact. So we also have to think about, you know, to your comment earlier about the H&M saying you can come drop off your fast fashion before you step into the store and buy more fast fashion. Those are sort of one-off solutions that maybe, you know, we have to shift everybody's expectations and look at all of those different impacts in a more important way. I think talking about it is huge. I think the more people learn about it and hear about it and talk about it, it starts to create a new norm, if you will. And I think this conversation is part of that.
It's so funny because each of these topics are so vastly different, but I think we've like tied them all into each other. But it might come down to behavior, right? Consumer behavior and how we're going to. Go ahead.
It's knowledge too. It's knowledge. I mean, I would expect, and from what you know, from what I hear from people who aren't like, I'm in a global industry, and like our company does global business. We ship back and forth. And I would think the average consumer, up until these kind of trade wars, really didn't quite recognize the origin of their goods. Really didn't realize, like, it's not even, you know, the Amazons who are kind of doing the one-offs. There are a lot of, you know, even Canadian and American companies who've been offshore manufacturing for years, years and years. And they've been bringing product in and, you know, or parts or pieces. And so you're the, you know, like people, if maybe you had a manufacturing job and you lost it, you have the understanding that these things are global or the origins are not American made. But your average Canadian consumer, do they really realize that almost everything is made somewhere else and brought in, whether you're ordering it from Amazon directly, so you kind of see like, oh, this was sent by post from China, this was sent by post from Germany, or everything that you buy in the store. Canada doesn't have the same, like we don't have to have a strict made in Canada declaration. So the origin has always been a bit obscured for us. And it's only now that there's these trade wars where prices are going up. Why is the price going up? Oh, because there's a tariff on it. Why is there a tariff on it? What do you mean it wasn't made in Toronto? Oh, you know, so there's a huge education piece. Like all of us in supply chain have kept, you know, you keep your offshoring, you keep that process, that supply chain process. It's not transparent. And the customer is very uneducated about it. You know?
That's a really good point, and it sort of goes back to Jess's, you know, original topic and kicking this all off, because do those bottom line impacts change company behavior? Probably yes, much more than anything else. And so reshoring, as they've been calling it here in the US, this idea of, you know, producing your original inputs here domestically, maybe that again becomes a better way to offset costs. And then you start to have a different broad economic impact. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah. And I think, you know, shows like this, like the Trade Squad, right? We don't really get too in depth in industry acronyms and all of that kind of stuff. So it shows like this that, you know, we're really going to be able to make an impact with that consumer, because we're going to be able to talk about these topics and really allow them to understand what goes on behind the scenes, I think, anyways. So Jess, just to wind this down, for your generation, you know, out in Indonesia and Singapore, what are you guys seeing as far as from a consumer standpoint? You know, do they want less packaging? Do they want fast delivery? And are those two signals kind of getting mixed or crossed?
When it comes to fast delivery, I think I like the point where you said that I think it was Leah who pointed out that it might go, things might be produced locally instead of offshoring now, which goes back to whether would you pay more for sustainable items, or now would it be would you want to wait more to get your items.
Mhm.
And when it comes to influencers as well, I guess you see a lot of them getting a package. I'm not sure what do you call it, PR packages. So a lot of the influencers now in Singapore and Indonesia are telling companies that we don't want your extravagant PR packages where you have to use balloons and with like a huge plastic wrapping and all of that, where we just want your, if you want to send us PR packages, just send it with the item itself or with a paper bag. And I think that has some impact, but at the end of the day, even though it's giving awareness, it's I believe it's not enough.
Yeah, and I think that, we have to be a lot more aware of what we're asking for too, right? So we're asking for less packaging, we're asking for help in climate change, and then you've got the IMO 2020 that's coming in to facilitate that, and yet your prices are going to go up because we're facilitating some of those environmental issues that people are bringing up and so conscious and so aware of. So, it's definitely awareness, education. I think that there's a lot behind that anyways, from what I'm seeing, because, we're talking two different things almost, and not really understanding the impact and what's going to drive things forward. And people don't want to pay more for that. So where do we stand? What do we do? IMO 2020 is coming, whether we like it or not. And prices are going to go up. So last topic of the episode, we are going to turn this right around all over again. And we're going to talk about networking because it's super, super important. It's a topic that I've been talking to Jess about because she's new to supply chain. And I also had a conversation about this last week. What do I do to get out there? I have passions about this. I have passions about that in supply chain. And I want people to be aware of it. I want to be known as a thought leader. I want to be able to network with more people. And so we were talking about how LinkedIn is sort of that tool for that. And I wanted to get everybody's thoughts on it, maybe talk a little bit about strategies, how you use LinkedIn, and how it helps you to kind of go global, right?
So I'm a big believer in networking and Trade Squad. I am so grateful to for networking purposes as well, because I have two former Trade Squad guests that are now going to be part of an upcoming conference here in California. So networking is huge, and I'll add, LinkedIn is a big part of it, but Twitter I think is huge, particularly in that professional space. Audrey and I, and now Sarah too, our Trade Squad tweets, but who remains critical. And what I find that's really interesting, I think for younger professionals coming up, is this idea that maybe someone that you'd like to connect with is too busy or too well known, and they're not going to take the time to talk to you. And then what you discover is most of the time people really get excited to be able to offer you access to somebody or make an introduction. And that's maybe an element of networking that we don't talk about enough. People want to connect you. They want to help you. They do.
Yeah, but I'm going to jump in there because I think your profile is really the key driver to that. So one thing I'm going to bring up is no picture. 100%.
Right?
No. Like, why are you on LinkedIn without a picture?
I don't even connect if you don't have a picture. That's absolutely true.
Yes.
Or can I just say, if I meet you in person and you are like a 20-year difference from your picture, then I'm also kind of suspicious. Like, honestly, at least every 5 years. Or put an avatar in, do something.
You need a picture and keep your picture up to date, okay? Because I will not connect with anybody that doesn't have a picture because that drives me crazy. I've also heard from other people that they will not connect with anybody that doesn't send them a note with their connection request. That to me takes it a little bit too far, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
If it's a cold connection, if I've just met you the day before, I don't necessarily need to, yesterday I do.
Good point. Yeah.
But it's like yesterday when we were at this and I met you and we just saw, of course I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. But I think I get a lot of the cold, add me to your LinkedIn network, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Who are you? What are you doing? And unless I see, like, if they're, if they're like a CITP, if they share the same designation as me, I'm like, oh, okay. I haven't met them yet, but we're in the same, group. We're in the same professional. Or if I see someone has like, Sarah and I share 18 connections with this person, I'm like, oh, okay, Sarah knows us, fine. But sometimes you just get random or like totally like random industries. Like I had a hairstylist, but she wasn't connected to anyone I know at, say, fashion. So I was like, okay, sure. But yeah, if you don't put a little like, oh, I think we have something in common, or I wanted to ask you this, can you have, just something. If it's a very cold connection, then yeah, I'm kind of like, I'll wait. I'll wait for 2 weeks until I can kind of figure out like, do I really wanna, but then now I'm have a lot of connections. So I'm like, really doesn't matter. I could just have them.
Well, and then there's messaging etiquette that I want to bring up, because I think that if you don't know the person and you've never met them before and you want to send them a message, great. But I think that you need to put forth the value that you bring to that person and not ask for what you want from the get-go.
Right away.
Like right away.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or
Leah, I get it all the time.
Yes, or if you start sending messages and I don't know you and you're making a demand, like, I'd like to schedule a call with you next week, then I block you. If you do that more than once, I block you. I don't need that. I don't need to be harassed online in addition to everywhere else.
I get that a lot too. Oh, can we have a meeting next week? I'm like, excuse me, I don't even know you. Like, I'm busy. I'm on last week I had like 3 people. Can we meet like for this week? And I'm like, I'm on vacation. Oh. Like it's some inconvenience to you who I don't know and have never met,
right?
And have no relation to my industry or any. I'm like, okay, like we need to take that request. I'm happy to help people, but there's like, I am busy. Like I'm helping other people who I know and who have, we've had a relationship.
But if they had said to you, this is the value that I'm bringing to you, this is what I like about what you're doing. If they had engaged with your post prior to sending the message and actually put forth the effort to be like, hi, I'm here. Thank you for the connection. I like your post. I'm commenting on your post. Then I'm sending you a message to say, hey, I think we've got some stuff in common. Would really like to talk to you about this. I don't know if you're available for a call. A call would be great. Let me know.
Or
totally
if you
different, right?
Unabashedly flatter me, sure. This is the best post I've ever seen. Can you help me with this? Yes, I can.
Put a little effort in, people.
Yeah.
So I want to know, like, does Jess even use LinkedIn, or do you feel like whatever?
You're like, oh, what are these people doing?
I do, but I feel like I'm on the other side where I'm the one asking for connections from people I don't know.
But that's okay. That's good. That's good. That's kind of like when you ask for a recommendation. Again, if I don't know you, I don't feel that that's ethical for me to recommend you for something. But to Audrey's point about flattery, if you recommend me for something first, LinkedIn prompts you to do a reciprocal recommendation. That's a good way to, get things going as well. And I will say, when I was in Jess's position early on, there were people that didn't know me at all. And I would send a message and I would always use the term colleague. Hi, we're colleagues in the global trade industry. And sort of hoped that was a starting point. And, most of the time people were actually very, very generous about connecting with me.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, what did you say, Jess?
I will take note of that specific line.
Use the word colleague, yes.
Well, and I think also for the next generation, just sort of coming into the industry, my advice to you, Jess, would be to get on LinkedIn, spend some time on LinkedIn, and really nurture your connections. So like I was talking about engaging, like people's posts, comment on their posts, because it's not just about bringing value to them. It's also about showcasing you as a thought leader. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by, putting your thoughts out there in a comment on a post that somebody else has already done. Or posting an article yourself. It doesn't have to be a long article. It doesn't even have to have a picture, or you could just do a LinkedIn post about, a topic that came up for you today that you've got thoughts around. that you want to say, hey, you know, this is what it meant to me. What did it mean to you, type thing. But I really think that people miss the mark with nurturing those connections, because you're going to get so much more from the people that you're connected with on LinkedIn if you would just spend the time and engage with them a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Would you guys agree?
I would agree. I think there's it's easy to get caught up in wanting to be ever present on social media. And I love you, Sarah, but I hate the term thought leader, because right up there with disruptor and influencer, and everyone thinks that they have to do that. You don't have to have that title. You can just be authentically you. I mean, I get what you're saying, but yeah. And so with my LinkedIn profile right now, for example, I used to be fairly active, but I've been writing out the new wave of Governor Newsom's administration and how he's going to frame out his trade agenda. And so I purposely have kind of held back until we define what that message looks like. And so sometimes, you know, being conscious of those types of things too. But I think it's easy to feel like you have to always be on social media, and that can get overwhelming.
Oh, it can definitely get overwhelming.
Yeah. And you also kind of have to have an idea of why you're any social media. If you're using it as a tool, you've got to have kind of a plan for why you're on there. And yeah, so for me, it's kind of two-part. It's one, I'm kind of in my career as it is at the present, you know, so I'm engaging with people in either similar industries. I'm looking for, you know, if there's connections for service providers, because I'm in procuring third-party service providers. So, you know, I'm looking at that. I'm promoting, you know, Orchard Custom Beauty. That's the company I work for. So I'm a representative to that company in the present and in actively. And then kind of a second part for me is thinking, you know, in 5 to 10 years, you know, am I maybe going to take my career in a new direction, or is there a spot that I may want to end up? Or, you know, like, you know, I'm so lucky with this opportunity for Trade Squad, or for, you know, I've been interviewed for a couple of blogs, say for the government. So it's kind of, at one point it's that present and engagement, and at another spot it's the future and preparation and making sure I'm prepared or have the connections for what might be next, you know. And it's kind of that, you know, it's, you know, kind of every day I'll go on, you know, say around 10 o'clock or something, and kind of just engage a little bit with people. If people message me, kind of at the end of the day, go back and, you know, respond to those messages, and just kind of thinking like, one, it's the present, like, you know, I post about the active stuff that I'm kind of doing, things that I'm working on, or, you know, resharing some of my company stuff. And then it's the, you know, how am I building connections with someone who I'm not really working with them right now, but in 2 years I might be, in 10 years I might be. And, you know, that's, but I do think about it. I don't kind of mindlessly go on there and like, la, 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 like, you know, it's just social media. I think with LinkedIn, it's important to think like, I'm sharing this, or I'm talking about my company, and then I'm building this connection with this person kind of for later, maybe. As opposed to like Twitter, which is just like, just my stream of consciousness, and I need coffee. That's, you know, it's different
frustrations.
Yeah, and POD and my Panama Canal issues, which I may have to tweet about again because it's a hot disaster.
Oh no. So do you have any like thoughts about LinkedIn, or any questions for us maybe that we can answer?
I think it's I agree about like LinkedIn for now and also the future, where that's where I think I'm more focused on. My LinkedIn is more for documenting. I'm not really great at creating, whether that's an article or a content. So what I do is mostly documenting what I do. I go to events, I take a few photos, I maybe put like a summary of it, or what I learned from the event. So that, I guess, luckily for me as well, that's how I might have been hired by the company. They saw my LinkedIn and they saw that a person, this person has like a growth mindset, because they're very big on the growth mindset. Because I'm not just a person that uses LinkedIn to apply for jobs, but I show that process itself. So maybe I'm not to that point where I do receive connections or maybe people who ask value from me, but for me it's more of just showing the process my goal is later on.
And that's amazing because you've just showcased and given a great example of how you use LinkedIn to get the attention of your current employer. And that's another way of using the tool, not only for networking, but also for future employment and for corporations looking for talent. Anyways, I think that we have been talking for a very, very long time. And I think this is going to be a great episode. People are going to learn so much. Jess, I really appreciate you joining us on this episode. And again, to Leah and Audrey, until next time.
Thank you.
Bye.